Welcome back to another episode of the Cadet Lounge. I'm your host, Cadet Sproul, and today we have a special guest with us, Major General Barry. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, before we get started, I just wanted to ask if you could uh, give us a little background on your affinity with University of Delaware and how you started your career in the military, how your career progressed, because not a lot of our podcast listeners might know who exactly you are, what exactly you do in the military.
Okay. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to be with you all today. It's this morning, but don't know when you'll be watching this. As you said, I am a graduate of the University of Delaware. I graduated and was commissioned from the University of Delaware Army ROTC in 1989. Lifelong Delaware resident, grew up just outside of Newark. And actually, I went to Middletown High School, and I had an appointment to the United States Coast Guard Academy coming out of my senior year in high school. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, I had torn an ACL and had to have surgery in my senior year. So I actually did not get through the initial MEPS physical to enter into that spring class or that class for that summer up at the Coast Guard Academy. As a backup, I had applied at the University of Delaware, and so that's when really the journey began. Once I had determined that I was not going to be in the Coast Guard, I kind of had a shift in where I wanted to be as far as a career and set my sights on being a Delaware State Trooper. And so that's kind of where I started working towards. The first week on campus, I was walking over the habit trail. I guess you guys still have it, and was coming down onto the green there. And there was a recruiting table set up with the ROTC folks. And one of the cadets, got my attention and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about the military?" Certainly, as a matter of fact, I have. And we got to talking and introduced me to the possibility of signing up for ROTC. So I signed up as a class and really enjoyed it. Once I got in, of course, you immediately become a part of the family. And then the first 2 years, as most of you know, it was without a contract. And I had applied after the end of my sophomore year, I had applied for a 2-year scholarship and was successful. So I had to sign the contract and then was locked in with the program. And about the end of our junior year, going through the summer and into the very beginning of our senior year, quite a few of our other cadets had joined the Delaware National Guard. Of course, they were Army. And they had gone into, a lot of them had gone into the aviation unit that we have. So I talked to a recruiter and learned about the simultaneous membership program. It didn't conflict with my scholarship. So I went ahead and joined the Delaware National Guard that fall and was assigned as a cadet to our maintenance unit, one of our maintenance units at the time. So that was October of 1988. And as I said, I was a scholarship. So I was a 6-year person. Here we are 33 years later, right? So anyway, so graduated that senior year, went away to officer basic course at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And while I was there, began the hiring process for the Delaware State Police. And as a traditional soldier in the National Guard, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, just like everybody else. And so was hired by the Delaware State Police, and then in January of 1990, I'd completed OBC by then, and then in January, the end of January, I started my DSP career. It's been an amazing run. There's a couple of caveats that I have to share with you. I was dating my now wife at the time, and she was already a member of the Delaware National Guard. She had joined at 17 years old while she was still in high school, and she was a member of our aviation unit, and followed up through the ROTC program. And of course, for her, she was utilizing her GI Bill benefits and all the state benefits that the Guard had, and that's what was paying for her college. So, so she finished up. She ended up being getting a degree in agricultural education, ag engineering, ag ed, and became a teacher down here. We ended up moving down to Sussex County, and she recently retired about a year and a half ago from teaching. Again, did my whole career, both of us, as traditional part-time guardsmen. In Delaware, the Delaware National Guard on the Army side, we're kind of broke up into two primary commands. You have Troop Command, and then you have the Signal Brigade Command side. And because we knew eventually the two of us would cross paths, we primarily stayed. She was in the Signal side, and then I was over on the Troop Command side. And that's kind of how we ran it all the way up, actually, until I was offered the Adjutant General job, and then she had to leave Delaware. And so we've been married again since September of '90, and we have two children. Our oldest son, he joined the Delaware Guard, Army Guard, as an engineer, heavy equipment operator, when he was in high school, finishing up high school. And then he went to college at Wesley there in Dover, and did his 6-year initial tour. He had a deployment in Afghanistan in the middle, in 2012 to 2013. And then when his 6-year enlistment was done, he had been fortunate enough to be hired by Delaware State Police, and he chose not to reenlist. So he's doing well. He's a trooper down at Troop 7 in Lewis. And then our daughter is a Rutgers graduate. She went through Rutgers, and then she didn't go into the military, but is doing really well. But both of them did utilize our post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. And so, if you want to talk about advantages, financial advantages of being in the military, and the education piece, all four of us in our immediate family were beneficiaries of those programs. So certainly it can open that up for questions. On the DSP side, did 28 and a half years. Really was fortunate. I had great supervisors in both fields, the National Guard and the DSP side, which allowed the two careers to intermingle. And then having a spouse that was also in the Guard, we were able to set up drill weekends because they were primarily the same weekends. So we just kind of worked it through, and really didn't have too many conflicts over the years. The same, for those of you that aren't familiar, I'll get into the National Guard piece here in a moment, but for those in the Guard and Reserves, or going into the Guard and Reserves, or don't know much about it, all the requirements are the same as the active component. So your military education, your civilian education requirements, the leadership positions, command positions at all the levels of command, whether it's in the Air Force or the Army, they're all identical. And so it's important that you get a good handle on the management of time so that there's a lack of conflicts. So anyway, went through my military career on the Army side, company command. I actually had two. I was a maintenance company commander that I'd been in for about 6 years, and finished up the time in that unit as the company commander. Then I went into a battalion staff position, but then had an opportunity to start up a second company. It was our engineer company in Delaware at the time. And they asked me if I would go back into command because they needed property book signatures and somebody to get the program started. And I'd been a commander for 3 years. So I agreed to do it. That is when most officers would have been doing a lot of their staff time at a battalion level. But for me, I'll always take command over staff. And so I did. I had a really good time with that. And then I transferred. I began a long tour down at the Bethany Beach training site down in Bethany Beach. The Delaware National Guard runs our regional training institute at Bethany Beach. And because I live in Sussex County, I was only about 30 minutes away from the training site. And I stayed there for quite some time, did some more staff work up at headquarters in between, but then I ended up getting my battalion command time as the RTI commander. And then I intermixed rotation as the officer candidate school commander, which was an 04 command, which is pretty unusual on the Army side. So I was really fortunate to have that opportunity. Became the RTI commander. And then when I was done that command, I transitioned back into the staff at headquarters. Again, I have to always kind of give you the parallels with my wife being in the military. When I was done my OCS command, I handed that command off to her as the OCS commander. Then I left during her tenure at the RTI. And then when I came back, she rotated out. And then I took over as the RTI commander. And then when I rotated out of that, she followed up. Now, a lot of that's geographical, just because we live down here, and it certainly makes it easy, with all the extra meetings and the extra work that you have to do. But also there's certainly an interest in the training part of being at an RTI. We run the recruits sustainment program. So you had MOS producing schools there. You had all your Army NCO courses being conducted there at the time. And then we had all the recruits, the Army recruits, and then soon to be Air Force recruits were going down there. And they were using that as preparation time for basic training in their AIT on the Army side, their advanced schooling. And it really worked out well because it kept the recruits engaged until they were completely certified with their Army MOSs, and then we would cut them back to their units. But we kept them engaged at the RTI during those initial years, especially if they were split option, where they were doing basics training one summer and AIT the next. Went back into staff at headquarters, worked my way up until I was eligible for command of troop command, and then became troop command commander as a colonel or an 06. And now the piece of all that is, you figure I was there all through the 90s, the 2000s. So a lot of my ROTC cadet classmates, they were off as lieutenants, young captains going through Desert Shield, Desert Storm, which wasn't a very long tenured event over the course of 30 years, but it was certainly a significant event because a lot of the kids that are in the same age as you are, as they stepped out in June from graduation and commissioning, they stepped right into a deployment. And that was certainly a big deal. And then of course, in 2001, you have 9/11, which was a huge change for our nation. It was a tremendous change for the National Guard because of our role as guardsmen, the dual role with the domestic response and then the war fight. And I'll touch base on that as I get more detail on the National Guard piece. And then so we were rolling through that. I was still down at the RTI through those years, but the workload increased because we really started prepping our soldiers and our airmen for deployment. But again, you also had to keep in mind the factor of the domestic piece, because those activities occurred, here within our country, within our borders. And then fast forward all the way to 2010, Iraq's been going on now for many years. Afghanistan has been fluctuating with the growth in and out of that. The war on terror Um, but at that point, personally, I had not deployed. My wife had not deployed. Um, and then the opportunity to come in, or the opportunity to deploy, came up with an embedded training team in Afghanistan in 2010 for me. So we put together a team of 11 uh, folks from the Delaware Army National Guard, and we joined up with the 86th Infantry Brigade Combat Team out of Vermont. And that ended up being about a 3,600 person deployment. It was just a massive deployment. And we handled Regional Command East, which was based out of Bagram Air Force Base, but the ETT, the embedded training team from Delaware, we gained about well, it's 13 additional folks. We had 11 from Delaware, we gained 13, so we went into Afghanistan with 24, and we moved up into the central highlands of Afghanistan, and worked in support of the New Zealand Defense Force. So again, all your theaters are broken down to areas of responsibility. And under NATO, New Zealand, the country of New Zealand, their area of operation was this province, a very small province called Bamiyan. And if you do any research, just go online and type in Bamiyan Buddhas. So it's Bamyan Buddha, Buddha, and you'll see the tremendous history of that whole region. And the province of Bamiyan is primarily a Hazara ethnicity. And so the Hazaras had been targeted by the Taliban in genocide and some really, really drastic attacks on the way of life for the Hazara people up in Bamiyan. So they were really receptive to the NATO forces coming in. And in the early 2000s, as NATO was establishing a foothold in Afghanistan, New Zealand picked up that province, and they did tremendous work there for quite a long time, almost a decade. So we were there in 2010. We were looking at transitioning the province of Bamiyan into a peace province, which meant that it was primarily designated or being defined as an area where there was no activity. And during our tenure, it was a pretty quiet time. There were a few unfortunate incidents. We lost some folks from New Zealand and some attacks, but by and large, we were really working on that nation building concept. And I'm not sure if you all would have covered that much, in your lesson plans, but typically that you're going to be in some sort of a nation building concept anytime you have boots on the ground in a foreign country. You don't have a choice. You have to try to establish and provide some sort of security and stability for the local population. And we were into that very, very heavily in Bamiyan, and we're very successful with it. The population was very pro-NATO because we had removed the Taliban from that province at the time, and there were a lot of atrocities. It's very sad, and there's a lot of history there, a lot of reading that you can do. So fast forward to 2017, I'm on the end of a 30-year career now. I was moving on to a retirement with the Delaware National Guard. I had already retired from Delaware State Police, and had announced my retirement with the Delaware National Guard. And we were then working under Major General Carol Timmons, who was an Air Guard officer, Air Force Air Guard officer. And she was a pilot, C-130 pilot, but she started as an Army National Guard. It's not true. She started as an Air National Guard security forces, enlisted. But then once she got her commission, she became an Army National Guard Huey pilot, and then decided that she wanted to fly jets. So she switched over to the Delaware Air National Guard. This is all in the late 70s, early 80s, and eventually became a C-130 pilot for the Delaware Air National Guard, and flew commercially for various airlines. And she came on board as our Adjutant General, and she held the position for 2 years. And I was working my way towards my retirement. My wife had actually, she was a senior 06 at the time for the state, and had been selected to replace me as I was leaving. And she actually became the director of the Joint Staff for the Delaware National Guard as a 1-star. And then our General Timmons, announced her retirement, unfortunate retirement at the time. And she asked me to pull my retirement papers and at least stay to be to be considered for the position of Adjutant General. And I was fortunate to have been selected by Governor Carney. And so in March of 19, I took over the reins of the Delaware National Guard. And that's when, because we were married, my wife had to move or relocate. She either had to go into retirement, go down to NGB, but she was fortunate to find a position as the Assistant Adjutant General Army for the state of Connecticut. They just happened to have a vacancy. There were a lot of rotations and cycles, especially in the general officer world. So she applied for the job and was hired, and continues to serve as Assistant Adjutant General Army for the state of Connecticut. So what I'll do is I'll transition into the National Guard, and I apologize for taking so long on the personal story, but it's really kind of unique, and it truly is about the National Guard story. So why the National Guard, and why not active duty or the reserves? For me, I learned early on about the dual mission of being the combat reserve, in my case for the Army, or for the Air Force piece, a very critical reserve component for the active duty Air Force. And for those two branches of service, that was certainly an interest, right? Because that was what truly wearing uniform was all about. But also the domestic piece and the uniqueness of the National Guard, and the way that it's constructed under the Constitution, and the way that our laws are established in the United States, where you're able to maintain a military official capacity as a federal asset, and to be deployed in times of war for the Army or the Air Force, but also to be under the command and control of the governors of the states, the 50 states and the territories and the District of Columbia. So we call it the 54. Being able to fall under the civilian leadership of those, and provide a resource to those agencies, whether it's at the state level within your own state. So you have the local, county, and state, support, and then also being able to interchange through the emergency management, emergency compacts, working for another state and still be in a state capacity. And it's really a contract between the governors getting together, where one governor may need help for an event, reaches out to a bordering governor or another governor, and they provide the sources, the personnel or the equipment to provide whatever service is needed, ultimately at the service of the citizens. And that's really what it's all about. So all 54 have a National Guard, and they all have an Adjutant General, and that Adjutant General is directed with training, manning, equipping, and training both of those forces, the Army and the Air. Obviously, just by description, most of your boots on the ground stuff would be Army, and then most of your flying missions would be Air. And I highly encourage all of you to look at your Air National Guard as a whole. A lot of your federal missions, active duty missions, or jobs will roll over into a job for the Air Guard. In Delaware, our Air Guard, we have 1,100 folks, and they're primarily centered around a C-130 wing. And I have a few headquarters folks that we've taken from the wing to brought up for the Joint Force headquarters, and we do operate truly a joint force. But under the wing construct, their responsibility is to man, train, and equip Air Force personnel so that that wing can be deployed for the war fight for big Air Force. And then when they're not under that Title 10 federal construct, they become available to the governor or the other governors to provide airlift from the flying capacity, or we have a cyber squadron, so they could provide cyber protections, whether it's it'd be defensive cyber protections in support of the state, and then all your other duties under that wing: engineering, security forces, transportation, logistics, personnel, as I mentioned, cyber, medical. We have a medical squadron. All those other military duties can and are implemented at the state level, and utilized to support the governor. And so that's why, I'm a huge proponent of Delaware. I'm not going anywhere. I was never interested in leaving or going active duty for any length of time other than the deployment. And of course, working, Monday through Friday as a trooper, basically, locally, certainly keeps you locked in. So there was a lot of incentive to stay with the Guard. Again, you may or may not have got much of a background, on the National Guard, but it is probably singly, as a taxpayer, one of the best financial programs that the federal government can operate. And I mean that sincerely. When you look at the dollar for dollar cost, the numbers change every day, but by and large, especially when you isolate the war fight and over the last 20 years, and you break it down more particularly into the Army, but the Army National Guard has held on to 40%, over 40% of the war fight in Afghanistan and Iraq. The budget is a lot smaller than that. And so I'm going to, without giving you bad numbers here, I'm going to give you some real numbers. So right now, I'll touch on the Army piece. You have about a 1 million person Army. 34% of the Army strength is Army National Guard, and they cost the nation 15% of the Army budget. So then when I switch over to the Army or Air Force side, you have just under 500,000 in your Air Force. The Air Force Reserve is 14% of the budget, and the Air Force, the Air National Guard, is 20% of that not budget, of that strength. So 21% Air Guard, 14% Air Force Reserve, 65% Air Force. Again, much higher numbers, active component for the Air Force than the Army, simply because of what it takes to keep airplanes flying. Basically as a factual statement. However, the Air Force, the Air Guard, is only 12% of the Air Force budget. So 21% strength, but 14 or 12% of the actual budget. So you see, for the nation, the combination of there's just under 400, there's about 100 and let's see here. Well, the Army Guard is about 336 right now, and the Air Guard is about 107. So do the math, just under 500,000, and you start to see that when you're still in the teens of percent for the budget overall, it's a tremendous savings. And as taxpayers, you all need to recognize that. Same thing applies to the Air Force Reserve and the Army Reserve and the rest of our reserve components. Just a tremendous savings. And that's really by design. When you look at the construct of the Constitution, the federal government is really tasked with a couple of things. One is that they are tasked with maintaining a Navy, right? Which is interesting, right? Because of the true costs involved in building ships. but then you build your Army and you build your Air Force as needed to meet the requirements. Now, of course, when all that was developed, you didn't have an Air Force, but the thought behind it all still flows. And so to have the ability to have a small active component, and then you surge those components as needed to meet whatever the demands are, it's a big savings for our nation. And the last 20 years certainly has really shown a huge part of that, and being able to surge for Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and all the other events and things that are going on. At the same time, you're handling hurricanes and ice storms and snowstorms and just tornadoes, fires, wildfires, civil unrest. Just been a crazy couple of decades here. And then, oh, by the way, in 2020 we throw in the pandemic on top of everything else. And so the true value of the National Guard for the nation has really been coming front and center. Delaware is a really kind of a neat example of the Air Guard and the Army Guard as a whole. We are supplied and resourced by National Guard Bureau, which is a four-star chief, has a four-star chief. So General Dan Hokanson sits on the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a four-star general, and he helps manage and get us the resources that we need, and to ensure that the Air Guard and the Army Guard are in lockstep with the Air Force and the Army. And that way we remain relevant at the national, or for the federal warfight piece, but those resources are what we convert from a federal resource into a state resource to do the domestic operations. And so on the Air Force side, I'll give you a real good example. So a hurricane hits the Gulf Coast of Texas, and literally within a mile of the coast is a very large hospital and retirement community. They have to move ambulatory patients within hours, right? The storm's bearing down. They know that they're going to be in trouble in this one. So they call in the Air National Guard. They load up a bunch of C-130s that were configured for aeromedical evacuation, and they start moving patients. And that was done in support of domestics, right? It's a domestic operation in support of American citizens, saving American lives, but yet utilizing that federal resource under Title 32 initially. Sometimes some of those missions transition into Title 10, but that's just an example of utilizing those federal resources at the domestic level. And governors talking to governors talking to FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, all coming together to develop a legal plan under a construct to provide a mission within the continental United States in support of our citizens. So go into a little bit about the last year. Just in Delaware, it kind of coincided with me taking over the reins as the Adjutant General. When I came home from the ceremony, the change of command ceremony in March of 2019, I had said to my wife, I said, it's March, usually have 4 or 5 months before we have to worry about hurricanes here in Delaware, so I'll be able to get my feet wet, and still haven't had a hurricane, knock on wood, but have had everything else. And so it has just been a whirlwind of events. And the Delaware National Guard, Army and Air, has really been engaged with just about everything you're seeing on the news. And we set up a very strong construct under the joint structure. And you may not be exposed too much to the joint world as lieutenants and even captains, but it won't be long till you'll start hearing about the joint terminology. And that's simply joint interagency, where you have a job that may interact between Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and then all your federal alphabet agencies all working together. And you might be a military officer, an Air Force officer working in one of those billets. And so joint will become very real to you. Well, all 54 are set up the same way. We have a joint headquarters. I have an Army headquarters and I have an Air Force headquarters. And the Army and the Air provide the resources, the personnel and the equipment to the joint force, which then works in support of the governor or another governor or another agency. And so if it's a hurricane and I need security forces from the Air Guard to come over, then we bring them over under the joint construct. Or I may need security forces to come under the joint structure and I send them to DC for the last 3 months working under the Capitol, the Capitol mission, where they've put up security, static security around the Capitol building, especially after the incident on the 6th of January through the inauguration and then through some other events. And they are still down there. So I still have a purple construct down at DC, but they're not working for Governor Carney and they're not working under my direct command and control. They're working under the task force commanders. So it's really a unique opportunity that we in the Guard can provide to the nation. And we were in support of the United States Capitol Police. So it really is an interesting dynamic, and all the experience that those folks are going to get, because we're sending them right out of basic and right out of AIT. Some of our soldiers and airmen hadn't even been to drill yet. They came home from their training and they stepped right into those missions. Partly by design, they need it, partly by the need for the mission, right? We need the resources and their skill sets met that demand, but also by the fact that they wanted to volunteer and because they are volunteer missions where they can step right out and provide security to our nation, which allowed for the peaceful transition of power. And that is a true event looking at things for the nation.
You mentioned the Air Guard and the Army Guard down in DC, and you mentioned that you were still under that purple contract. Describe to me a little bit about what that purple phrase means. What
Side
being
by
purple in
side,
the Guard.
Army and Air, blue and green creates the color purple. They're side by side, same equipment. You can really get into specialized mission sets. I'll divert for you just a second. When we go back to November and we looked at the elections, the Delaware Air National Guard has a cyber operations squadron. I'm not allowed or authorized to give you too much information, but I can say that they are typically an offensive cyber operations squadron. They do offensive missions.
Sure.
They don't do anything, obviously, in Delaware, and they do things that that were not in clearances to talk about. However, because of their expertise and the fact that they are guardsmen or reservists, they are some of the top cyber professionals in the world, not only in the United States but in the world, and they're choosing to serve in uniform. So the skill sets that they bring, they convert very easily to assisting government security, information security sections and agencies. That skill set converts very easily. Well, when we were encountering the elections in November, we knew that there were going to be, see it in the news every day, the targeted attacks on our election systems all around the country. Each state, county, local governments, they're under attack every day in the cyber world. So we were able to take some of those folks, put them on state active duty, state employees working for the governor, and do some assisting to try and secure Delaware's infrastructure. Right. And they did tremendous work. So it's the same concept of taking, whether it's a cyber operator or a security forces airman or a logistics airman, and sending them to DC. There are certain military skill sets that they learn simply by wearing the uniform in their basic skills, and they meet the opportunity to fill a void. So in DC, it is a purple construct. Army Guard and Air Guard working side by side under the Capitol Task Force.
And it sounds like it works out really well.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. In fact, as you rotate leadership positions through through these task forces are really effective ways to meet a mission and accomplish a mission, because it kind of gives you the freedom to pull in whatever you need, whatever resources you need to attack that problem.
Right.
And invariably, you're going to attack it at the source, which then allows for mission success.
Just like
So,
the TV shows.
yeah, exactly. It's really well. And then we do manage it. We don't manage it, but we track it at the state level, so that if they need to grow or reduce the strength in DC, which they've done since January, we manage that to make sure that we're providing we're the force providers here in Delaware to that mission. And so again, we don't know the exact date. We have a projected date when they'll be coming home, but that could change tomorrow based on the footprint or the intelligence or anything that's going on.
Sure, sure.
But again, it goes back to the construct of the Guard being able to work within the continental United States in support of another agency. And in that case, it's the U.S. Capitol Police.
Sir, before we continue a little bit, I always ask our guest speakers an off the wall question. I'd love to know, if you were back in high school, let's turn back time. If you had a blank check, what car would you have driven to school? What car would you have immediately went, that's the one I want. That's going to be my ride every single day.
Well, it's funny that you picked that question, because my first car, and it was the one I wanted, was a 1948 Plymouth Coupe. And we restored it. My father and I worked on it and restored it, and my mother, three of us, all worked on the restorations of it. But there was always in the back of my mind, I always wanted a Jeep. And so, I was a lifeguard in high school and first couple of years of college. So the Jeeps were always near and dear. But having an antique car as a first car was pretty cool.
Do you still have that Plymouth?
I do not. College got in the way, college bills, and needing a car to commute back and forth into the city of Newark. The Plymouth really wasn't set up for pulling into the metered parking or the student parking. I needed something a little bit smaller.
Sure. Man, that's a great choice. I don't think I have any opposition to that.
That was neat. It was a talking point. It was a real big deal in high school.
Sure.
But for me, then the Jeeps were always near and dear. Of course, so you can imagine what my son's first car was. It was a Jeep, because I had always wanted one, and I had never taken the turn to get one. So he got one.
Good. Well, sir, I know you mentioned it a little bit. You, as the Adjutant General, oversee a lot of what the National Guard does, but being a Major General, there brings a question of who almost your commander would be. Who would you take orders from, and take direction from? It sounds like it's the governor.
Yep, it is. So for each state and territory, the Adjutant Generals, they are actually state positions, except for DC. In DC, it's still a federal position. In
Okay.
DC, you have a 2-star commanding general, and then you have a 1-star adjutant general. And so the commanding general in DC certainly works hand in hand with the mayor of DC, but they are a federal asset. But within the states, we are state assets. So Monday through Friday, I work for the governor, just like I did as a trooper. And I'm a member of the cabinet, the governor's cabinet, the equivalent of cabinet secretary. And so my job is to support the governor and make sure that man trained and equipped, just like on the federal side, but for the state mission. And then on drill weekends and annual trainings, and then general officers get extra general officer days, because the requirements, you couldn't do them in 15 days that you get for annual training.
Right.
And it takes a lot more. So the federal government does give you a lot more resources, but that's when I'm on federal orders. And then Monday through Friday, I'm a state employee. So today I'm working as a state employee. Last week, I was on some federal duty because I had to go down um, to 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 DC for a conference with General Hokanson. So I was on federal order, and so my status changes quite a bit, and the statuses of the folks that work. I have some state employees that Monday through Friday work for the governor, and then on drill weekends, just like I do, they put the uniform on. Then I have active duty Title 32 active guard reserve folks that work full time, and they would be federal 24/7, 365. Then
Gotcha.
I have federal technicians that Monday through Friday, they're civilian technicians. They're like a GS 12. And then on drill weekends, they're a traditional drilling guardsman and annual training. So it's a lot of different opportunities in guard.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you're the man of many hats.
Oh, there's a lot. It's good, but the staffs as a military construct, it's all about staffing. It's all about setting up your commanders, your sub commanders, and then your staffs, and utilizing the staffs that are provided under military doctrine. As long as you follow the military doctrine, my job is a relatively easy job. I have an assistant adjutant general Army, assistant adjutant general Air. I have a chief of staff for the air, and I have a director of the joint staff, which right now it can be Army or Air, but it's an Army general officer. And
Okay.
so when I talked about that it's a three-legged stool, joint, Army, and Air. So if you stick within that Army or that military doctrine and let commanders be commanders, let the staff do their jobs, and don't get in their way, and don't micromanage, it's really a simple construct, and the missions will get accomplished because of the people that we have in the formation. They're just tremendous citizens, and it's really really a good job.
Awesome. That's awesome. Sir, I wanted to ask you in like you just said, you're a very unique but important role. Um, could you share maybe what your proudest moment was as AG? And if you're also willing, what would keep you up at night with that role?
So the we didn't factor in the pandemic. So to say what is my proudest moment, it's ongoing. I can't isolate it to a specific thing. I do have an event I'll tell you about in a second, but as the Adjutant General, the work that's being done within our communities, whether it was the testing that we were doing, now the vaccines that we're giving, supporting all the other agencies that are doing vaccines, that is an ongoing moment. And never missing a beat when it came to civil disturbance. Even, we haven't had any major storms, as I mentioned, but to watch the soldiers and the airmen, step in, and they're saving lives literally every day, as you know. It's well covered in the news and the media. So it's an ongoing proud moment, and 2020 has been a year like no other. It's been titled the Year of the Guard, and it truly has. A specific incident over the years, and I'm going to reflect back, was the deployment of troops to Superstorm Sandy. If you reflect back, Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy was coming to Delaware. It was going to be a direct hit on Dewey Beach. And I guarantee that Dewey Beach would not look the same if it had not made a right-hand turn prior to hitting landfall. It made a right-hand turn as it was heading west towards the East Coast. It made a right-hand turn, and it went into that New York, northern New Jersey corner of the coast.
Right.
And within Delaware, we were all very thankful that it did not hit Dewey Beach. However, because we were so close, and the demand for services in New York City and northern New Jersey was so great, we stood up several of our units, but the first unit that we stood up was our transportation unit, the 1049 Transportation Company out of Seaford, located in Seaford. And I rode over as we were mobilizing those folks within hours. And as we lined that convoy of military trucks up to get them into New York so they could move water, food, fuel in and out, we're in really bad shape. We were trying to evacuate people off of the islands of New York. And we mobilized the entire company within hours. And it was rolling north. And I remember standing at the gate as they left the armory at how quick their response time was, as all these young guardsmen were standing up and jumping in that convoy to get into New York to help our fellow citizens up there. And they were the first military movement across the bridge over into New York proper. And
Wow.
the work that they did was just phenomenal. And again, guardsmen saving lives. That really, from my perspective, because I had at that time, I was a 1-star, and the responsibility of coordinating and training and manning troops was really pretty great on my shoulders. And to see that come to fruition was just phenomenal.
That's awesome. They
And
sound like
anyway, it was a great day.
they sound like modern day Minutemen.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Back
mean,
in the
they're
day.
rolling, right? And they still are every day.
Absolutely. Well, sir, I appreciate your time. We have talked about a lot. Before we conclude here today, I would like to know if there were any last words or messages that you would want to leave on those tuning into the podcast, whether they are ROTC cadets who are only really familiar with the active duty, and have now gained a lot of knowledge on the National Guard, or if they're Army cadets, anyone else who is understanding their role in the Army and how they can support that. And for those who might be considering the military, those who aren't active in the military at all.
Well, so first off, my final comments really resolve around thank you, because without folks like you all that have become that less than 0.5% of our population that has volunteered to wear a uniform, thank you for that, because that really is the backbone of everything. Is that's what makes up our military services, are individuals that have decided, they willingly chosen to raise their right hand and take that oath to the country. And really, that's where it all begins. The military is not difficult. The academics, the jobs, everything is set up for success. And so as individuals, the only thing I can encourage you is to always try to exceed the standard in everything that you do. Meeting the standard will get the mission accomplished. Exceeding the standard will allow you to have a little bit more input on where your career will take you. Again, the academic part, the professional part, that's all not difficult. We're going to teach you what you need to know. The piece that's on your shoulders, morals, ethics, and integrity. It's the only things that we can try to instill, but that's where it comes down to an individual choice. And so as you all move forward, take your oaths of office very, very seriously and recognize your positions as officers or the NCOs or simply as members of the service. All servicemen, men and women, they have to take that oath very seriously. And if they do the right things, morals, ethics, and integrity, they're going to have fine careers and will do great things for our country. As soon as they start, it's not violating those things, but not following what you learn in morals, ethics, and integrity. That's when the issues will arise. And going back, having a spouse that's a military member, one of my main questions is, as I come to a decision point, I say, what's the person sitting across from the dinner table going to think about my decision? Or in your world now, social media, what's the front page in our day, the front page of the news journal. What's the media, the social media going to say about your decision? And if you don't want it out there, then that's probably not the course that you want to go, and you want to relook at your decision. And so a few guiding principles can really help you stay on track, especially with the moral ethics and integrity piece. And then again, we'll teach you what you need to know, follow what we teach you, the military as a whole, and you'll be fine. But it's those other things that'll get you. So that's all I ask as a senior leader. I just ask you to come with good, sound morals, ethics, and integrity, and then we'll take care of it. So,
Major General Barry, thank you for your time today and for the discussion.
okay, thank you very much. Take care.